Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Jenny Wu. She is here to tell us all about the Wonder app. Before we invite Jenny into the studio to let us know all the wonderful things the Wonder app can give to families, we want to invite all the authors that are listening to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. You'll be able to find out how we can help you celebrate your book to the world, literally to the world. We have so many ways to help you celebrate your book. Of course, you can be a guest here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have a huge global audience. The podcast we've been publishing since 2017. The podcast has been downloaded to every single continent in the world, including Antarctica. Being a guest gives you the chance to tell our global audience all about your book, about you, about your inspiration, about the kind of conversations families can have while they're reading your book. Hey, you can also submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. That's a really powerful seal to have on the front of your book. You can also take part in our monthly promotion program, where will be celebrating your book through commercials on the podcast, to messages to our over 110,000 social media followers. Display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. We have billboards in Boston, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Albany, New York, Toledo, Ohio, Hermiston, Oregon. Imagine that. You can learn all about that and more by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to our various services. I'm really excited about this interview. Our guest today is coming to us from New York City. She is the co-president and chief product officer of Understood.org, and she's here to celebrate the Wonder app. Please welcome to the show, Jenny Wu. Hey, Jenny, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to learn what the Wonder app is all about. But first, can you tell us a little bit about what Understood.org is all about?
Absolutely. So Understood.org is a social impact organization that's been around for about a decade. And our mission is to provide resources for the 70 million Americans who are neurodiverse, or who we would call have learning and thinking differences, such as ADHD and dyslexia, and to help them thrive throughout their life. Understood has been around for about a decade. It all started with our founders, Fred and Nancy Poses, who have two wonderful boys, one of whom has learning and thinking differences. And, you know, growing up, they realized that they were fortunate enough to be able to support and help guide him. But there really was a dearth of information about learning and thinking differences that they could access. And so they wanted to, you know, devote a portion of their lives and their energy towards solving this problem. And so early on, 2012, their first project was called the Parent Project, you know, and they have always stress the importance of expert-driven information as well as easy-to-digest information as a way to really support parents and families in helping their children thrive. And so they created this website with a ton of, easy to access, easy to read articles that helped parents with everything from what's going on with their child to how to get IEPs to talking with their teachers. And, you know, over time, you know, almost organically, they realized that there were up to 2 million people visiting the site a month.
Wow.
Yeah. And obviously they realized that they were solving a real problem, and this was something that parents and families really craved. And so Fred, who's our founder, stepped back in as CEO about 4 years ago, and really, was trying to find ways to, take the best practices of all different industries. So started hiring from, education, from agencies, from, tech startups like my own background. And how can we use product and technology to really scale this problem? How can we help the 70 million people, in the U.S. that are have learning and thinking differences that may or may not know where to turn. And so over the years, we've developed podcasts, we've developed, e-magazines. We have 3,000 articles on understood.org that are completely free to the public. And our newest product is called Wonder, which is a free, first of its kind community app that you can download on the Apple App Store, that connects you to parents who are going through the exact same thing, who are parents of kids with learning and thinking differences, as well as, actual experts in the space that cover a range of topics, from ADHD to dyslexia to managing emotions to, homework help, so that parents can really feel less alone as they're navigating this journey with their children, and that they can actually get access to accurate information.
Oh, this sounds wonderful. And the number that you're using of 70 million folks here in the United States who learn differently or have some learning challenges. And of course, the term neurodivergent is something that we've been hearing more often. And one of the questions I've had, because I've been working with folks through social services. My wife's just retired as a special needs teacher after 34 years.
Amazing.
Yeah, and when I was in human services decades ago, the term autism and people who were who were considered autistic were very severely challenged, and the number of people were limited. I don't know the percentage, but nowadays we're hearing statistics that I think it's 56 out of 100 boys in the States are somewhere on the autism spectrum. It baffles me, and the biggest question I have is, did we just not know that these folks are on the spectrum decades ago, or has something changed to the point where now we have more people on the spectrum?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors, and I think we don't know all of them, but we certainly, have enough data to know that there is a spectrum, mm-hmm. right? So, and we know that spectrum is a lot about severity. And we also know that, kids are getting diagnosed more, and even adults are getting diagnosed more, and that in general, neurodiversity is a lifelong neurological condition that not only is associated with autism, but is associated with a range of learning and thinking differences, such as ADHD, dyscalculia, auditory processing. There's so many things that I think we didn't realize how to maybe delineate between, but because there is a whole spectrum of severity, it really affects more of the population than we realize. So 70 million translates to 20% of the population. It translates to 1 in 5 of the people that you know. So it's typically at least one person in your immediate family, and at least 2 people in your kind of immediate friend group. Mm-hmm. And so it's really baffling, how prevalent it is. And, I think we're just starting to understand the urgency of that. We have data now to show that for kids who learn and think differently, they are 3 times as likely to drop out of school. Mm-hmm. They're 31% more likely to be bullied, and have kind of the mental health challenges that are associated with that. And as adults, they are twice as likely to be unemployed. And those are conservative, statistics. And so, I think we're just realizing, that this is a much more urgent problem. And that's why we created Wonder. We heard from so many parents, who come to Understood and who don't, who were just feeling so isolated and alone, in trying to figure out, what do I do for my child? What is going on? And, how do I get their school or society to understand what's going on? We conducted a study to show that over 50% of parents with neurodiverse children did not speak about, their conditions with other people because they were afraid of the stigma and the associated biases. And that's so, that's so disheartening, because it does a disservice to them and their children in getting help. Mm-hmm. And so what we realized, Understood, is like, if we want people to absorb our resources and absorb the information that can help their children thrive, we first needed to make them feel safe and to make them feel like they weren't alone. And so Wonder really connects people to parents who are going through the same thing. We have, groups on various topics, but we also have local groups. So you can find local resources, in your city, in LA or New York right now, that can hopefully, share information about what are the regulations in your state, what are the specific IEP, stipulations and things like that. And so it gives people hopefully a sense of control over something they don't have control over. Mm-hmm. And we heard, from so many people that they just didn't feel safe, and they wanted a safe place to talk about that. And I think, to your point, there's also been a lot of misinformation. I think the rise of, the term neurodiversity and all of the discussion around it has been great, to an extent culturally. And I think a byproduct of that is there's been a lot of misinformation, about ADHD, about certain conditions. And I think it's important that, an organization with credible experts and kind of a history of experts in the space, are ones that are able to kind of give parents, real answers and cut through that noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that you use the term learning differences. I'm old enough now that we've heard, the language changes constantly, and it went from learning disability to learning challenges. I like the term learning differences because it really highlights the fact that you were mentioning 20% of kids learn differently. I actually think we all kind of learn differently because we have all sorts of different interests and experiences. And I think as we start to recognize that, you use the term IEP, Individual Education Plan. I would love for us to get to the point where everybody has an IEP. Yeah. And, teachers start sitting down and think, teachers have the time and the resources to be able to sit down and think, hey, all 30 of my kids in this classroom are different, and so I have to figure out a way to reach them all on their level and not try to get them to all learn the same way.
Absolutely. I think, we work with educators and give them resources to help them, support the neurodiverse children in their class. A lot of where kind of the first inklings that something might be going on happens not in a special education classroom, but happens in the general education classroom. So for teachers who might not be trained in this area, they need resources. Mm-hmm. They need to know how to navigate this. They need to know that, the child might not just be kind of, misbehaving mm-hmm. or lazy or daydreaming. We've heard stories of people who are adults now who still remember when they were 8 years old and they got called out by a teacher for not paying attention. And that has really left a mark and stuck with them, and sent them down a journey that could have been different, mm-hmm. And so we have tons of resources for educators to navigate things like parent-teacher conferences, to make those more effective in talking to parents, to provide resources to parents in a kind and gentle way. But we also recognize that teachers can only do so much. They are outstretched, as it is. And, the education system is what it is. And there's wonderful organizations that are trying to tackle that. And we recognize that we can only do so much to change that system. But what we can do is arm the teachers as well as provide the families with the kind of resources that they might not be hearing elsewhere. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love that. One of the things that was so frustrating for my wife as a special needs teacher is there were a lot of parents who really resisted getting their child diagnosed. My wife was one of those teachers who could just deal with everything. And so when there was a child, quote unquote, misbehaving or being an issue in a classroom, they would send her down, that child down to my wife's class because she could deal with it. And my wife is there like, if this kid were in my class, if the parents agreed to sign the IEP, get a diagnosis, then I could work with the child instead of just, having to deal with the fact after they're being punished for getting thrown out of their regular ed class. It just was it wasn't productive. So to be able to have those resources that a teacher in a typical classroom could sit down and talk with a parent and let the parent know, hey, we're not trying to label your kid. We're trying to get your kid the help they need.
Yeah. In our research, we found that parenting style, and there's a couple of different parenting styles, controlling for all other things, whether it's a, education level or this and that of the parent, parenting style actually accounts the most, in, how the child, ends up dealing with their learning and thinking difference and their, potential for thriving success. Mm-hmm. And so the way that the parent responds is probably the most influential thing in that child's life, to help them thrive later on. And so we are acknowledging, that it is really difficult to, go through the journey of what you thought your child was going to be like, or what you thought their potential was going to be like. And that is a valid and 100% understandable kind of journey that parents are on themselves. And so the parents need help in the same way the child needs help. A lot of times our parents, not only in dealing with their child's, potential learning and thinking difference, but start to realize that, oh, these are things that I dealt with too when I was growing up and were kind of ignored. And so one of the ways that adults start to learn about their own learning and thinking difference is actually seeing it in their child. Mm-hmm. And so we see that so much. And that's a lot for parents to go through when they're just trying to raise a happy, fulfilled child. And so, again, providing them a safe space on Wonder with other parents that are not going to judge you, are not going to shame you or label you, and not going to make you feel like a failure, is something that's so important, because without kind of lowering those emotional barriers, you can't move forward. Mm-hmm. To your point, your wife can't convince the parent to take the next step, whatever that might be for the child. And so it's really important that, parents feel seen and that they have an outlet to kind of go through the emotions of what it means for them and for their child.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit more specifically about the Wonder app. What does it look like when I go on there? I'm guessing it's not like Instagram. I'm not going to be scrolling through people twerking and all of that stuff.
Yeah, we designed the Wonder app specifically for intention and not attention. So there's no big general feed, there's no need for kind of vanity or things like that. What we've done is make it a really safe and authentic experience, to encourage kindness and good behavior. We have everyone use their first name, last initial, so their real names instead of a username. And it just helps people be kinder to each other. When you first onboard and register on the app, we ask you a number of questions around the age of your child, whether you're a parent or an educator or just here for yourself as an individual. We ask questions about, what topics you're interested in, and it doesn't necessarily have to be labels. It doesn't have to be ADHD. It could be time management. It could be organization, things or focus. It could be things that they're noticing, and they just don't know what it all means. Mm-hmm. And so from there, we actually put them into kind of curated micro communities of parents that are dealing with the same thing. And they can, go into these conversations. A lot of people just go and read and realize that a lot of parents are struggling with the exact same things. And we encourage the behavior of making people feel like they can be really vulnerable and raw in these posts. And so if you go into the app, you'll see that parents are incredibly honest with what's going on in their lives and are incredibly honest about how it's affecting them and their children. And that's been, a real source of pride for us, that we've created a really safe and authentic community where people can be really vulnerable.
Do you think you can go over to the folks at Twitter and Instagram and maybe help them make their communities a little bit safer and kinder?
Yeah, well, apparently there will be a lot of Twitter employees that will be looking for jobs soon. So maybe they can come help us. But yeah, and I think on top of finding, kind, like-minded parents, they'll also find specific groups that are just for experts. So we, like I mentioned before, we have experts that talk about, managing emotions with ADHD, or, kind of organization, and homework help and things like that really, you just want real answers. And so we have direct access to experts that are well known in the space, that, come from diverse backgrounds, and are able to, give these parents the type of answers that, they can hopefully stop just Googling for. So it's been a real lifesaver for a lot of parents. We've gotten great feedback so far. We've been in beta for about a year. And we have, over 10,000 users that, many of whom have told us that they have learned tangible coping strategies on Wonder, that they have, felt more connected and been able to say things they can't say elsewhere. And that's really been a wonderful experience for us.
One of the things that we talk about here on the podcast is, obviously talking about books and the fact that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And it's obvious that the Wonder app can act like a beautiful mirror to allow families to see their family portrayed in a positive light and to find community. Is there a way that the Wonder app can also be a window in to give parents of quote-unquote typical kids a chance to look into the lives of families that are dealing with kids who learn differently, to help those families develop more empathy?
That's a wonderful sentiment. We have, users on the app who aren't direct parents, but sometimes are aunts and uncles, and teachers. We do have educators on there. We have, grandparents, and we have a lot of individuals who might not be directly affected, but because they know someone or they see someone going through something, they want to help and they want to understand. So they use our resource center, which is another part of the app that often, people who just want information will go to. And we've packaged together some of the some of the best kind of 101 content on what is ADHD, what is dyslexia, what are some of the, related conditions that it, kind of reflects. Because to your point, your listeners obviously want to cultivate this love of reading. And for children with dyslexia, not only is reading a challenge, but the frustration and the emotional turmoil that goes with not being able to, or having it be harder than other people, can lead to a lot of mental health challenges for that child. We've seen that exacerbated in the pandemic, right? That without kind of the in-person instruction, children with learning and thinking differences have fared much worse than their neurotypical counterparts. And so the mental health aspect of, the learning and thinking differences is something that is really an urgent crisis for our children right now. And I would say historically, that has been more diagnosed than the actual learning and thinking difference. Mm-hmm. So in our society, it's less stigmatized to be diagnosed with some sort of mood disorder, such as like an anxiety or depression, than a lifelong neurological condition like ADHD or dyslexia. And so you see a lot of children, particularly girls, who have, who aren't diagnosed and who have missed that diagnosis because society just doesn't want to look at that. They assume that because they're not hyperactive, that they can't have ADHD. And they see them daydreaming and they see them, unfocused, and they just assume, that, they're just a little daydreamy, and have a great imagination. So I think that we're just dealing with some of the, mental health, realizations of the kind of toll, that this can take on children. And I think that, that mirror, really is reflected back in a way that has been exacerbated during the pandemic.
Mm. I think you and I could speak for, a couple of days, because this is fascinating. It's not only fascinating, but it touches a part of me that I just want to help. I just want kids, parents to figure out a way to be happy. I am way too old to be worried about, I'm better than that person and that, just if we all figure out a way to support each other so that we can all thrive and reach our full potential, that's the key to life and happiness.
Absolutely. So the first step is I encourage everyone, whether you have a child or not, download the Wonder app. It's available right now for iOS only. It's spelled WUNDER, and it's available on the Apple App Store. And you'll see the type of conversations that are going on across the country for people that you might have not known were struggling with these things. And a lot of them are struggling silently. And so that's one step. The other step is to, go on our website, understood.org, or simply the letter U.org, and you'll see, just an array of like easily digestible resources and information about what's going on, about learning and thinking differences. We've partnered with iHeartRadio, and we have kind of campaigns that help people understand that everyone is wired differently. Mm-hmm. To your point, none of us, are better or worse than anyone else. And even if you're neurotypical, your brain is wired differently. I've heard you talked about how you're maybe a more tactile learner, and other children, are different types of learners. We're all different types of learners. And if we could all recognize that, we have children who are just wired differently, and that they have strengths and challenges just like everyone else, then we could hopefully get rid of the stigma and kind of the silence that comes with some of these conditions. And that's really where we want to get to, is just for everyone to realize that everyone is wired differently, and we all have what it takes to thrive.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling that the Wonder app will be available for Android soon. And
Yes.
in anticipation of that, I just want to give an open invitation when that happens, or when another feature gets added to the app. Please come back on and let's continue this conversation, because I think that's important. I think we need to understand that this is an ongoing conversation that we need to have as a community, as a society, to really help us to support each other, to lift everybody up so that they can all reach their full potential and happiness.
100%. And we will make sure that you're one of the first beta users for the Android app.
That sounds great. We've had a great time speaking to Ginny Wu about the Wonder app and about understood.org. Ginny, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Bob Hartman returns to the podcast to celebrate the latest book in his Clever Cubs series. You don't want to miss it. It's a really fascinating conversation, and it's especially fascinating if you are an author and you're interested in doing school presentations. Bob and I both together, I think we have like 60 or 70 years combined experience presenting to kids. And we get into a really fascinating conversation about that, about how to present to kids, how to pull together a program. And you don't want to miss it. I think there's a lot of wisdom, and you're really going to benefit from it. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Ginny Wu. Please be sure to check out the Wonder app. And please be sure to tell all of your family and friends and your kids' teachers about the app. You have no idea how much that could mean to a family. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q, Jordan Saley, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.